Hello and welcome to Faithfully Stampin' with Jennifer Helm. I am Jennifer Helm, the Faithful Stamper, independent demonstrator with Stampin' Up! Today I have for you a technique that is very popular and very on trend right now. Lots of demonstrators and card makers are using this technique and I have been wanting to try it, so here we go. This is the torn paper technique. It's very quick and simple and just involves tearing some designer series paper or cardstock to make a lovely card. And the fantastic thing about this card is you do not need a lot of supplies. So to start with, we are going to take a card base that is 8.5 by 5.5, scored down the middle at 4 1/4. You can really use either style of card base, the long skinny one that's 4 1/4 by 11, or this style. It does not matter. Each one works for this particular card design. And I'm just going to go ahead and shut or close the card up on that score line, and then I'm going to set this to the side. Next, you're going to need, for the whole project, 2 pieces of basic white that are 5 1/4 by 4. One is going to be for the inside of the card, and one is going to be for the front. And so we're going to go ahead and start with that front panel and get stamping. Now I am using tonight the Happiness Abounds stamp set from our new annual catalog. This coordinates with the piece of designer series paper that I chose for the project. And this is a photopolymer stamp set, so I do need a little cushion underneath. So I'm going to grab my Stampin Pierce Mat. This is a nice thick piece of foam that is great for cushioning under photopolymer stamp sets, or if you have a piercing tool and you need to poke a hole in a paper, say for a brad or some other reason, it also works for that as well. And these are in our catalog. If you don't have a current or a demonstrator you're currently working with and you would like a paper copy of our catalog, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to send you one. And otherwise, you can check out our new catalog online. And we do have a new holiday mini catalog that is coming very soon. Okay, so basic white panel. And I'm just going to do some stamping on here. I have Gorgeous Grape that I'm going to stamp my sentiment in. I'm pulling all my colors tonight right out of the designer series paper. So I have my stamp mounted on my block, and the first thing you need to decide is which side of the paper you want to put your sentiment on. Just pick right or left. Doesn't matter, you can do it on either side. And you can do it more towards the top, bottom, middle, not too close to the top or bottom, up to you. So there is my sentiment. Now I want to accent just a little bit, and I'll show you why in a minute, but I want to quickly put that under here. I have a small floral bouquet stamp, and I'm going to stamp here near the end of my sentiment. This is Pool Party ink I'm using. And I know this kind of looks funny at the moment, but you'll see why I'm doing this momentarily. And then while I have my stamps out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp the inside panel as well. So I have a coordinating greeting that I'm going to stamp in the Gorgeous Grape. And then I'm going to come back with that floral stamp in the Pool Party. I'm going to accent both my corners here on this one. And then before I put my stamp away, I have my envelope, and I'm going to stamp the corner of my envelope as well. That way everything coordinates nicely together. I'm quickly going to shut my ink pads up, and then we will get to the rest of the card. So next you're going to need the panel that you stamped on for the front, and a piece of designer series paper that is 3 3/4 inches tall and 5 inches wide. This is from our Hues of Happiness set, coordinates with that Happiness Abounds stamp set. Lots of beautiful florals. So this is the paper that we're going to tear to reveal the sentiment. And I'm going to share with you what I consider a little trick to lining things up. I just find this easiest. So I'm going to take this panel, but I'm going to turn it sideways. And this paper we're going to layer on top with a little border around. And obviously if I do this, I can't see where I need to tear it. So I'm just going to slide it down a little bit so I can see my sentiment, and then I know, okay, I need to tear it about here and here, and I've got a nice visual to line that up. One thing to keep in mind is as you're tearing designer series paper, it's got a white core. So if you tear it a certain direction, you're going to see more of the torn white paper. And if you tear the other direction, you're going to get a little bit cleaner and not so much of that white paper showing. So just keep that in mind. Some people prefer one look over the other. So I've got this lined up. I'm going to tear it about here. So I'm going to tear up towards me, and that is going to prevent that white paper from showing so much. You might get a little bit, but not as much as if you were to tear pulling it down. I always have to stop and think about that. And then I can kind of gently pull my paper back here and say, okay, I need to tear it a little bit more. You don't want to go too far past your sentiment though, because as we roll it back, we might have to move it a little further back, and you don't want to have the paper really like out here in no man's land. So err on the side of caution. You can always tear it more, but you can't really put it back if you go too far. So I think that's good there. And then I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull it back a little bit, make sure I'm lined up where I think I would put the paper down, and tear from here. And so just going to do the same thing. And then I can lift that middle panel up and see if I've torn enough. Give it one more little tear. And I think that's good. And so now you can see if I turn it back sideways, that's about where I want it. So next we're going to go back to that card base and start assembling the card. The first thing I'm going to do is take that inside piece that I stamped my inside message on. You do not need any special adhesive for this card. Whatever you prefer will be just fine. So my inside panel gets centered on the card. Now we're going to flip to the front, and I recommend gluing these two pieces together first and then gluing this on the card before we do anything else. So what I'm going to do is flip this over. I turned it sideways again. I really don't need to. You want to put adhesive around the edges, and then on these two strips as close to the edge as you can get. You definitely don't want adhesive hanging off the edge, and you do not want any adhesive on this middle panel that you tore, because then it would defeat the purpose of that torn paper look, and your card would be stuck. Whoop. Need to pay more attention here. So just go along the edges. I am using our Stampin' Seal, and then come back, and you can see this is nice and sticky. I'm going to come back and get kind of close to, there we go. My adhesive is famously persnickety on camera. All right, so no glue on that centerpiece. So you can line it up either sideways or this way, whichever way you prefer. Just make sure you've got it lined up so your sentiment shows underneath. And then press that down. Try to make sure you don't have any bubbles there in the card and the paper. Now, I highly recommend putting this piece on the card front now, because otherwise, once you roll the paper, it adds a little bit of dimension, so it's a little harder to glue this panel on when you've got a bump. So it's much easier, in my opinion, to glue this panel on while it's nice and flat. So you can do it whichever way you want. Honestly, I put a lot of my samples together working against that bump. So that is why I share do it now. All right. So now we're ready to really present that torn paper technique. And the first thing you want to do is tear a little bit off the strip, because you just don't need this much bulk rolled up on the card. So I tear about half of it off. And then what I like to do is just start from the edge and roll it back. You can make it perfectly round if you want. Very often it kind of comes a little bit flat, which is fine. Either way is good. And if you can see here, I want to roll this back a little bit further. I want, I think, one more roll. So what I'm going to do before I roll that back one more time, I'm going to take a look at where I would want my glue if I roll it back one more time. And so I'm just going to put a little bit of adhesive right there. I don't want adhesive out here where it's going to stick to my card and cause a problem. But I definitely need that glue there to help hold my little paper roll in place. And so I did that. I probably could have gone one more time maybe. I think. Yep, I'm going to roll this back one more time. I'm just gently going to tear that paper. I want to show more of this. But I'm going to show you a second trick. And you might want to do this in addition to the tape. It would have been perfect if I left it there, but this way I can show you my other little trick. If you put a card together and you come back to it after a minute if you have to walk away and you've noticed that your little paper roll is starting to lift off, here's a great trick for you. Grab a couple of glue dots and a take your pick tool. And so I'm just going to take 2 glue dots, and fling them in the air. I've never done that before. And I'm going to put 2 glue dots, one at the top and one at the bottom. And this is just a nice, easy way to make sure this little paper roll is not going to lift off the paper. So you can use it just with that adhesive I showed you the first time, or you can add or just use those glue dots. Either way works. But now I'm happy because I can see this little floral image and see how, that's why I put them there, just to add a little accent so it wasn't plain white with my sentiment. So I like that. Now to finish this off, I'm just going to grab some opal rounds for a little bit of an accent. You can skip embellishments if you do not want to add any. It's totally up to you. I'm trying to finish up a pack here, so I decided to put them on the card. And so there, quick and simple, is that torn paper technique. So that did not really take me any time at all to put together. Sometimes tearing the paper takes you longer than putting the whole rest of the card together. And this card will look different every time you do it just because paper tears differently. And so here are 3 samples that I did. And I think you can see that they are all slightly different. This was actually the first one I did, so I really kind of didn't know what I was doing, and my tear was all over the place. And you can see here how more of that white paper is showing, which is fine, but I do prefer the slightly cleaner look. And one other thing I forgot to mention when I was doing my Facebook Live earlier, another option you have for when you're tearing the paper, to help you figure out where to tear it, you can take an aqua painter or a water painter, and once you figure out where you need to tear, just take your water painter and run it down the paper, and then you'll have that very faint water line so you know where to tear, and it also makes it just slightly easier. You don't want to drench the paper because you don't want to ruin your project, but just giving it a little swish down kind of gives you a guideline for where you need to tear the paper, and then you're ready to go. So just a little tip there. So these cards are great for any occasion, and you're not tied in just to using designer series paper for your top layer and cardstock underneath. You can switch it up. So here I've used my designer series paper underneath and stamped my sentiment on the cardstock. So everything else is the same. I will say that cardstock is thicker, so you definitely want to tear it shorter. You don't want to go too short, but you definitely want to take off a large chunk of the roll so that this isn't great, big, and bulky on your card. And if you like, you can even add a twine bow to dress that up a little bit. So just something fun you can do. And also, when you are doing a card like this with your designer series paper underneath, you do not have to cut a full 5 1/4 1/4 by 4 or even 5 by 3 3/4 panel, and then cover it all up with that paper. It's great for small chunks. If you've got a panel that's just maybe a couple inches tall and wide, then you just tailor your torn paper to it. So it's a great way to use up scraps too. You can also use 2 pieces of designer series paper. You can add a layer if you want to just have more layers on the card. But here I used one of our new suites of paper coming with our little gnomes. This was fun, and so definitely a Christmas card here with the snowflakes. But then I tore it back to reveal our sweet little gnomes here. And then here is the inside with my Christmas wish. You can also turn the card vertically instead of horizontal. And you can tear either from the right or the left. You could even do top to bottom if you wanted, depending on if that worked for your design. So there you go. This one I really let the paper do the talking and just coordinated my ink colors with it. Added some very subtle gems just for a little bit of subtle embellishment. And then there is the inside. One thing I wanted to share is when you are making these, they're very easy to mass produce, because if you're using a sheet of 12 by 12 paper and you cut it 5 inches wide, then you can cut it lengthwise or height-wise 3 panels of 3 3/4 of an inch out of that one strip of paper. You have a little bit left over, so you might want to use that for an accent on the inside of your card. But it's really simple to cut all those papers, cut your card bases, and really make several cards at a time. I made 2 or 3 of each design very quickly just by cutting the paper like that. This is great for manly cards as well as floral cards. Here I used our He's the Man suite and have our manly stamp set with the paper and some masculine embellishments. And then just some more ideas to show you here. This is one of our new celebration papers that is coming out in July and August. And you can see how I just changed the card simply by changing where I stamped and then how I rolled the paper back. And I like this paper so much, I did it in 2 other colors as well. So I have Orchid Oasis and Starry Sky. So I put these together really, really quickly. You can change the look of your card just by changing the embellishments. You can also change the look of your card by changing up the color of cardstock. For example, here I changed the background. So I didn't use basic white, I used Blushing Bride and just coordinated everything with my cardstock. So lots of anniversary cards here. And then last but not least, one more to show you. I needed some new home cards. And so I took another one of our celebration papers. This was our Rings of Love paper, which one of the panels has lovely houses on the back. And so again, I used a smaller chunk. I targeted which house I wanted to show on the card front, and then I tore my cardstock specifically to showcase that particular scene. So very simple. It's a great way to spotlight DSP, great way to use scraps, or even just showcase a beautiful panel on the front. Very quick and simple, lots of different styles and techniques that you can use for this card. As I like to say, I am all about the options. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed learning that quick and easy torn paper technique. If you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can click the notification bell and then be alerted each time I post a new video here. And if you're a Facebooker, you can hop on over to Facebook and find me at The Faithful Stamper. I do live videos there, typically twice a week, and you'll also see more about specials and other projects that I might be working on as well. So thank you so much for watching. Take care and happy crafting.